Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely pull back the curtain on the invisible business gears turning underneath the glossy, headline-grabbing world of modern football. You know, when a superstar player holds up that brand new jersey in front of all those flashing cameras, well, what you're actually seeing is just the very tip of a massive, incredibly complex iceberg. So, let's decode the secret language of the transfer market, shall we?
Okay, let's dive right into this. Because to truly understand the modern game, we have to look at the staggering financial stakes involved. I mean, think back to 2013. The whole world watched in absolute awe as Gareth Bale moved from Tottenham Hotspur to Real Madrid for a jaw-dropping, record-breaking 100 million euros. This one single move created a domino effect across all of Europe. It literally forced Madrid to sell another superstar, Mesut Ozil, to Arsenal just to balance their books. But it really makes you wonder, right? How does a single human being become valued at 100 million euros? And how does a club actually pull off a deal of that sheer magnitude?
To answer that, we're going to follow the chronological life cycle of a multi-million-dollar acquisition. We'll be looking at 1. Scouting in the data age. 2. The multi-club network effect. 3. Masterminds, the sporting directors. 4. Agents and strict FIFA rules. 5. Anatomy of a player contract. And finally, 6. Accounting for megatransfers.
All right, starting off with number 1, scouting in the data age, from intuition to analytics.
So our journey begins at step 1, which is simply finding the right player. Historically, scouting was this heavily romanticized art form. It relied entirely on personal observations. Picture a scout standing out in the freezing rain with a notepad, trusting their gut instincts and a highly subjective eye for talent. But man, that approach carried huge risks of human error and personal bias. Today, it's a whole different ballgame. The question isn't just who looks good out there, but what exactly does the data reveal? Clubs are now using platforms like Opta, Yscout, and Instat to dig into expected goals, progressive carries, and defensive duels. They've got wearable GPS trackers measuring exact sprint speeds, and AI is even stepping in to predict future performance trends. It provides this incredibly scientific foundation to what is essentially a multi-million-dollar gamble.
To really ground this in reality, just look at Brentford Football Club. They famously climbed all the way to the Premier League using a true Moneyball approach. They analyzed expected goals, or XG, relative to minutes played to unearth undervalued players. A perfect example is Neil Maupay from Saint Etienne. He bagged 41 goals in 2 seasons for them, and then Brentford flipped him for a massive profit. We saw something really similar with Liverpool's recruitment of Mohamed Salah. That was heavily driven by analytics that identified his relentless pressing and blistering pace as the exact missing pieces for their system. Data essentially takes out the financial guesswork and turns good teams into elite, well-oiled machines.
Moving on to Section 2, the multi-club network effect, corporate strategies in football.
Now, once a player is actually identified by the data, the corporate structure they're walking into plays a huge, often completely unseen role. There's this absolutely fascinating study from the Deutsche Sporthochschule Köln that analyzed tens of thousands of transfers. And they found that these multi-club networks act as a massive strategic advantage. MCOs, multi-club ownerships, show a much greater propensity to use internal loan deals within their own family of clubs. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means they can snatch up young talent early, develop them in a lower-tier league at a sister club, and keep them around without ever losing control of their registration. Plus, the data shows that just belonging to an MCO has a subtle yet really significant positive effect on transfer prices. They're leveraging their internal networks for both player development and financial strategy, and honestly, it's forcing regulators to keep a very close eye on market integrity.
Which brings us to Section 3, masterminds, the sporting directors, the architects of the squad.
Okay, so we've got the data and we've got the club network. But who's actually orchestrating these massive chess-like moves? Well, there's this natural tension at the heart of literally every football club. A head coach or manager is completely focused on immediate survival, right? They're worrying about day-to-day training, weekend tactics, and getting those 3 points on a Saturday. But a sporting director, they are thinking years down the line. They're handling the multi-year strategic planning, managing the massive transfer budgets, overseeing the youth academy, and yes, even hiring and firing the head coach. So while a manager might be screaming for a ready-made veteran today to win the next match, the sporting director is meticulously balancing the books to ensure the club is still competitive 5 years from now.
Just look at some of the heavyweights in this field. You've got Monchi, who built Sevilla into Europa League kings by systematically finding undervalued players in lesser-known leagues and then selling them for absolutely massive profits. Then there's Michael Edwards. He completely transformed Liverpool using a brilliant blend of data analytics and traditional scouting to build a squad that won the Champions League. And of course, Chicky Beggarstein at Manchester City. He designed an entire systemic philosophy there, recruiting young, highly technical players that fit perfectly into Pep Guardiola's possession-based style. Basically, these directors build the house, the coach is just managing the people living in it.
All right, Section 4. Agents and strict FIFA rules, regulating the dealmakers. Once the sporting director zeroes in on a target, it's time to hit the negotiation table. Historically, the agent landscape could feel, well, a bit like the Wild West. At times, the fees paid out to agents and intermediaries were reaching up to 25% of the total transfer cost. That is wild. So, to protect the integrity of the whole transfer system, to protect the players themselves, and to stop millions upon millions of dollars from just bleeding out of the game, FIFA stepped in. They introduced a totally comprehensive, sweeping set of new regulations.
The barriers to entry are incredibly rigorous now. You can't just wake up one day and declare yourself a football agent. Today, an aspiring agent has to submit a formal application and pass a super strict background check. We're talking no criminal convictions for things like corruption, money laundering, or match manipulation. Then, they actually have to sit down and pass a difficult official FIFA exam. And even if they somehow pass that, they still have to pay an annual fee and do mandatory continuing professional development just to keep their license. Unlicensed individuals, they are strictly banned from performing any football agent services, period.
But the real game changer here is the strict cap on service fees. Let's break down the math for a second. If a player earns less than $200,000 annually, an agent can take a maximum of 5% of their remuneration. If the player earns over $200,000, that cap drops down to 3% for the excess amount. Even in situations of permitted dual representation, where an agent represents both the player and the buying club, assuming they have explicit written consent to do so, the fee is strictly capped at 10%. On top of all that, every single payment must be routed through the newly established FIFA clearinghouse. This effectively limits the millions of dollars agents used to extract from a single transaction and totally prevents those shady, hidden backroom payouts.
And just so we're clear, these rules, signed off by FIFA President Gianni Infantino and Secretary General Matthias Grafström, they aren't just polite suggestions. They are legally binding across the entire globe. Every single national member association is strictly required to implement and enforce these regulations, ensuring that no matter where in the world a transfer is happening, the ethical standards remain exactly the same. Moving into Section 5, Anatomy of a Player Contract, the fine print. Okay, so the numbers are all hashed out, and now we arrive at the actual legal agreement. Now, there is a totally crucial legal distinction here that gets mixed up in the media all the time: the difference between a release clause and a buyout clause. A release clause is basically a pre-agreed minimum amount that a club will accept from another club to sell a player. Pretty straightforward, right? But a buyout clause is legally binding compensation paid by the player themselves to terminate their own contract, which effectively makes them a free agent. Fun fact, buyout clauses are actually mandatory in Spanish contracts. So, to protect their biggest assets, clubs will set these at astronomically discouraging figures. I mean, Barcelona locked down their 18-year-old phenom Pedri with a jaw-dropping €1 billion buyout clause.
Furthermore, these contracts very explicitly outline an employer-employee relationship. These players aren't just independent contractors who can do whatever they please on their days off. They are bound by incredibly rigid daily obligations. They've got to maintain a high standard of physical fitness at all times, obviously avoiding any off-pitch activity that might endanger them, and they are bound by strict exclusivity. They literally cannot play professionally in any other sporting activity without written consent from the club. But on the flip side, they do receive standard employee benefits mapped out in the legal terms, things like up to 20 days of paid annual leave and specific sick leave allowances.
And finally, Section 6, Accounting for Mega Transfers, Players as Intangible Assets.
Now we reach the final, grand stage, how a club actually manages to pay for all of this. The absolutely crucial point to remember here is that the massive headline figure you see flashing across your TV screen, that is just the base fee. The actual cost to the club is a whole mountain of hidden fees stacked on top. First, they have to pay training compensation to the youth clubs that develop the player from ages 12 to 23. Then there's a solidarity contribution, which is a flat 5% of the transfer fee distributed to the player's former youth clubs. And then you add on the agent fees we talked about, the player's personal signing bonus, their astronomical weekly wages, and the fierce negotiations over image rights, which dictate who actually profits from jersey sales and TV commercials.
So how do clubs survive this massive financial hit? Well, European football clubs use something called International Accounting Standard 38. They treat human players as intangible assets.
So let's say Real Madrid buys Gareth Bale for €100 million on a 5-year contract. They don't just record $100 million expense in year 1. Instead, they amortize it, meaning they spread that cost out. They record a €20 million expense each year for 5 years. By spreading out that financial blow across the exact length of the contract, clubs can legally comply with strict financial sustainability regulations while still spending massive fortunes.
But as you can probably guess, this creates some completely bizarre financial quirks. Enter what we call the homegrown anomaly. Because international accounting rules clearly state that you cannot capitalize internally generated intangible assets, players developed completely from a club's own youth academy basically have a book value of 0. 0! That means Lionel Messi, a guy widely considered the greatest player on the planet, could not be formally capitalized as an asset on FC Barcelona's balance sheet. Their financial statements were technically totally understated simply because they trained him themselves rather than buying him from someone else. It's crazy.
And that really brings us to the ultimate question. We've traced this entire journey, right? From data analysts crunching expected goals, to sporting directors mapping out 5-year plans, to agents navigating new legal caps, all the way to accountants spreading human value across 5-year amortization schedules. The modern football transfer is truly a marvel of strategy, law, and high finance. But when human beings are essentially reduced to amortized intangible assets and numbers on a spreadsheet, who really wins the hidden game? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see a player holding up a shiny new jersey. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes peeled for the game happening behind the game.